Some people go into negotiations totally unprepared, and you don't want that to be you. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about negotiation secrets and our thoughts on some of the most important strategies you can do as a buyer or seller. Stay tuned.
The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den.
Welcome to this episode of The Den. We're happy to have you today, powered by the Lyons Group. Today, we're going to be talking about negotiation strategies, what you should know as a buyer or seller to put you in the best position to get a good deal. And before we get to that, let me introduce my friends, my partners, my co-hosts, the fellow members of the Lyons Group. To my left, Paul, hand me the rockberry. Missing today, Miss Melissa, let's go Glasgow. And that's right. That's awesome. Aspen, the Ninja Groen, and Shannon, the boss. Martin Martinez. My name is Ben Lyons, and I'm your host of The Den Top Brokers, taking on tough questions. So today, negotiation secrets. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to peel back some layers on strategy there. Now, some people see what we do, and they really don't know that we're negotiating as we're realtors. Every conversation I have is leading to something, and it's very subtle. But before we get into my play on things, Paul, talk to us about some of the do's and you can't hold a frying pan, right? No banging people, no headlocks.
I've been told I can't punch people in the face.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably a good rule of thumb. But talk to me about real world negotiation strategies. You can pick buyer or seller or both. Like, what are your thoughts on some of the negotiation strategies you have as a professional realtor?
My background in sales started in the oil field, and I had a boss that he's old school. He's actually my father-in-law, but there's a training course called CARIS Negotiating. I don't know if anybody here has heard about it, but it is one of the leading courses in negotiating skills. So I went there in, I think, 2011, 12, 13, somewhere in there. It was like a week long in Denver, and it was all role playing. So when people ask me to do role playing, I say, absolutely not.
Wow.
I don't ever want to do that again.
Role playing is tough. Oh my gosh.
But if you don't know how to do sales or negotiating, it needs to be on your radar because it's the only way to do it. So CARIS has a couple of things that I still use to this day. It is knowing the other side's levers, their like pinch points or their whatever they think is the most important thing to them. So in a real estate deal, sometimes it's time frame, sometimes it's price, sometimes it's ego, and once you know the other side's, what is the word?
No, they're levers. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah. So you have those levers that you pull at certain times. So my job, now that I know we have these levers, is helping my client, whichever side I'm on, pull them at the right time. A lot of people just say, I want to show my cards, or I want to ask for all of this up front. Then I go, well, then you have no negotiating power later on. So for me, it's a lot of the upfront before we even get to the negotiation, finding out all the finer details and getting the best advantages I can for my client.
Understood. So in fact, I just had this same situation happen. I've got some buyers that are working on making an offer. They actually submitted an offer on a property. This podcast comes out in another week or so. So the negotiations will be done at that point. So, but you're getting the inside track right now. And these buyers, we went out to this property and it looked like it was an estate sale. In other words, the parents who maybe owned this property for a lot of years had moved on. We got some inside information that maybe one of them had passed back in 2014, 2015, but literally the home looks like it has set the way it has been for the last 7 or 8 years. Like they still have food in the drawer, in the cabinets and silverware, but it's dusty. Like it just hasn't been touched. And so my read on that was these people don't want to come back and do this. So if you make an offer buyer, make an offer and say, you can take whatever you want and you can leave whatever you want. And that may be appealing to the seller. And so I made a phone call to the other realtor and it was exactly that. She said, she told me this twice. Oh, Ben, if you make an offer like that, that'll go so far with the seller. She just cannot emotionally come back to the property. So that speaks to your point, Paul, seeking first to understand what those levers are and then going from there. So do you have any examples of situations like that come to mind?
I just wrote an offer last night on, I guess we shouldn't talk about current ones, or I guess you just did. So,
I just did.
So I said, I knew the buyer wanted the deal, and I knew that there were multiple offers. So there were other offers in. So as soon as I hear that, escalation clauses and go over asking, all of those things that I tell the buyer, I say, you need to put your best foot forward. They can negotiate later on, but we need to come out with a good opener. So I think, sometimes we see like really high priced properties and we want to tell the buyer, they go, well, that's not worth that. I'm going to offer like way over here. And what do we say every time? If you offer super low, you could either anger the other side, make them mad and say, I don't want to work with you, make them less likely to come down at all. So a lot of times we're negotiating with our clients to get what we know is the better deal and kind of move them to a spot where we think we have a good starting point. And from here, we can move towards what you want.
The game within the game. Even with our own clients, we're constantly negotiating.
And I like playing the game against you, probably the best.
It's really fun. And that's a good point. I mean, when we go in when we're working with buyers, I always have this conversation with them because they do oftentimes say, well, I don't feel like that price is, I understand that, but there's a good solid line between a low offer and then offending someone. Mm-hmm. Now, if you offend someone, they're not going to give you their bottom dollar. And the whole point of the negotiation is to draw out that bottom dollar from the seller. So if you offend them, then it's done. So you got to find that sweet spot where you can frame it in a way, or you can come in a way that does not put the seller on the defensive and then they just wall up and say, go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So some of that plays into it. But Aspen, let me know your thoughts on how you approach negotiations, maybe a holistic approach of how you approach negotiations, and whether with a buyer or a seller, you can pick either side or run with just a general thought.
So I do negotiate actually pretty hard for either my buyer or my seller. I was trying to think of, well, what is a strategy? And I think it kind of comes down to two things. I'm a really good listener, and I don't say the things I'm not supposed to. So I have a lot of times whenever I'm talking to other brokers and they just give you everything. And I'm like, stop. I don't say this. I listen.
Don't tell them. Yeah.
But I'm like, oh my gosh, you just gave away everything. I know it doesn't matter if my seller says they're not going to fix anything now because you just said they love the house and they want it no matter what. That's not, you're giving away your client's negotiating power when you do that. So I think just sitting back and listening, but also listening to how they're saying things, the tonality, kind of the other filler words that they're using. I think listening is one of the biggest things you can bring to negotiation. And then I can go to my seller and say, hey, I think if you don't offer anything, it's a risk. But if you say no, I think they're still going to go with the house, just from the information I gathered. But of course, it's a risk. So I think not overstepping the line into the agency, but giving the seller or the buyer all of the information. Or like, they've already moved everything out of the house. They are done. They're ready to go. They have another house that they're buying. You just hear these things, and just being able to give all of the information you can to your clients. And most clients know what they're comfortable with. If they say, no, I'd rather give $5,000 and not risk it, or you know what, I could really use that. Most clients know what's best for them. So it's my job to gather the information and then say, what do you want from this? Do you want me to negotiate for you, or do you want to kind of come in at a middle ground? So
yeah,
that's how I do it.
Spot on. I mean, that's really the subtleties in negotiations are the listening component. You're listening to, especially when you have another realtor on the other side that's just blabbing away, and not in a, I wouldn't say in a devious way or anything. You're in a friendly way. You're gathering information. And so then you take it back to your client and you say, here's kind of what I gleaned from this. And I mean, yeah, you could potentially go all the way to this goalpost and, play hardball or somewhere in between. And like you said, most clients have that internal compass and they go, look, in fact, we're just dealing with a deal. We're closing here in a couple of days, Paul, where my buyer, I gave him the goalpost and he said, I just really want to be fair and I want to get this done. And, I'm not trying to get to this side. And thank you for showing me where that parameter is, but I'd rather be right here. I feel good about that. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's wonderful. At least you've laid it out based on what you've gleaned from those conversations to put your buyer or your seller in the best position to make a decision. What are your thoughts on that, Shannon?
Well, I completely agree with everybody. I think that knowing, we always completely agree, don't we?
We do. Me and Shannon do. We agree a lot.
She's my twinnie.
When we talk about knowing what the other side wants, a lot of people come in and just say, so why are they moving? So, are they getting divorced? Okay, we can't really tell people those things, But like you said, we pick up things along the way. You see things by looking around the house. You understand, you understand they got a lot of stuff and maybe 5 kids and maybe they need an occupancy agreement. Maybe if I get what I want, they can get what they want. So I always tell people just try to be flexible. It has to be a win-win for everybody to work. And nobody goes into a deal going, I just got completely ripped off. Who signs up for that? Nobody agrees to that. You have to know what the other side wants and try to leverage that. You have to know what they want, what they need, and try to work with that to get what you want and what you need. I think that's important. I think my second thing that's really important, we talk about this, is not get emotional in negotiations. I know that it's your biggest purchase or it's your biggest sale. And, this is the house that you brought your kids home from the hospital to. There's a lot of things that become emotional. But the problem is when you wrap up that too much, you start seeing only what you need, only your side, only what's important to you. And you have to realize the other side doesn't care that you brought your kids home to this house. That doesn't add value to them. They're not concerned about that. You have to step back and take out your emotions and understand that, it is a business transaction and you want to do the best. And when you're getting the best and they're getting the best, it's a win for everybody. And that's when transactions move forward, is when everybody wins.
Yeah. And I call that sometimes rocking the boat. So sometimes we go into these deals and immediately it's like everyone's grabbing their wallet, right? And so the boat starts to rock back and forth. And if you kind of keep that momentum going, man, the deal just gets uglier and uglier as you go along the way. Mm-hmm. But if the very first move you make after you go under contract or during the process of negotiation is maybe an olive branch, mm-hmm. right? I'm not going to beat you up on this type of thing. Then that boat's not rocking. It tends to move through the deal, the transaction, on a lot smoother note because of exactly what you're saying, Shannon, in the sense that you're seeking a win-win for everybody involved and you're showing the other party that you're conscientious of what their needs are as well, which actually, my mother-in-law says all the time. You can get a lot farther with sugar and honey than you can with vinegar.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that's an important note because you don't want to sit there.
You never know what you're going to need later on. You never know. If you're really staunch in your negotiations right up front, or you leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth and then say, 2 weeks into the deal, you find out that, your lender says you're going to need a little extra something. How do you go back and ask that seller for something when you've already mistreated them? Yeah. Stay out, you don't have to give in to everything. If it doesn't work for you, but be open to it. Just be open to what they might need and what you might need and what's a good middle ground for it. That's really where the deals happen.
What we don't really realize is if we're on the opposite sides of something, that I'm only negotiating with you, but I'm also negotiating with my client, and to try to make sure that the way you present information to me is not confrontational to them. Mm-hmm. The way they give me information is not confrontational mm-hmm. to you. Like when I go up against a very skilled, seasoned realtor, I use different tactics than I would against somebody newer. And once I know how they work, I might do it completely different. Like if I go against you or against somebody that's been only doing it for less than a year, it would be completely different tactics. We'd collaborate. I would take the professional role with somebody else. Not collaborate, but we would complement how we're dealing with something.
Understood.
Because you would clarify. Clarifying questions is always important too, because if you don't understand something completely, you've got to get everything. So when you bring it to your client, you know the ins and outs. Then you can take their reaction and say, well, remember this, or we can use this later, or, those types of things.
Or lost in translation. Oftentimes as realtors, we serve as the buffer, right? So we got really emotional mm-hmm. clients. They're coming at us, right? And if I carry that energy over to a newer agent, especially, mm-hmm. and say, oh man, my people just feel like they've just been given on this. And, they're really upset. And then that newer realtor, and I shouldn't pick on newer realtors, but it's a learning process. It takes years to kind of fine tune that. They carry that to their clients. Now that boat's rocking. It's really rocking. As far as being a buffer, Aspen, what are your experiences there as far as being able to go, I understand what my client wants. Should I convey some emotionality with that and some intensity with it? Or do I just play it straight and give them just the professional, here's here's what we need. I mean, how much of a buffer do you act with your clients?
I think it depends. I mean, obviously, if they're really emotional or really upset about something, I don't think I'm going to go and tell them. But if I know my client is done and they're going to back out of the deal, I'm gonna tell the other broker that and be like, this really is their last negotiation. This is their last offer. And I think as long as I'm just saying that in a professional way and not in a, they better do it or we're going to leave, a threat coming from honesty, I think it's fine. I think that then they can convey and everybody can make the best decision for themselves, not the brokers. The buyer can make the best decision. If they're going to walk away because it's not the deal and the seller can't lose that extra $5,000, that's okay. It's okay for deals to not work. It's fine. I think the problem is a lot of the time brokers want that closing so bad. There's holding a deal together and then there's like forcing it together. Yeah. There's like, oh, we can do this to make it like, that's not a big deal. We can fix it with this. And there's like sometimes you do have to pull out all the stops to make a deal stay together because they both really want it, but maybe the lending side is really tight and then they're buying something and that's really tight and no one has any extra wiggle room. That's fine. We can make it work, or they need extra time, or it's just not working. It can fall apart over $500. It happens, and I think as long as you're not trying to force it, that's really going to be in the best interest. I think whenever people feel like maybe they got screwed, is because it was kind of forced a little bit.
I would echo that. I would say the same thing. You definitely, and you can sense it from your broker too. Like, are they wanting this to close because they need a paycheck, or are they wanting it to close because it's a deal that should close?
And when we talk about emotions, sometimes those emotions do come from the realtors, unfortunately. You'll have realtors that come to you and say maybe something along the lines of, well, I don't think that's fair, or we don't want this. Well, you're not a party. You're going to have to step back and realize, that's part of negotiating is, standing behind what your customer wants, not what you want.
And there's been many times over the years that I've went, oh, I don't like this. I tell my clients, look, I don't necessarily agree with it. Sounds like it's going to be the path that you'll need to take to get this done. And yep, we'll do it. Okay. I mean, I personally wouldn't do it, but you've made the decision. I've laid out the cards.
Yeah. Another strategy that plays into all of this emotional stuff is if you manage expectations at the outset, then you don't have the huge ups and downs of emotion that a lot of buyers and sellers have. And usually that comes around the objection time and who's going to pay for repairs and whatnot. But if you manage expectations at the outset, that's why I like to say to buyers, I'm like, just think that we will not get anything done from the sellers. We won't get anything from the sellers. If you still like the house, let's go for it. And from the sellers, like, plan on doing a ton of stuff to get this thing sold. Then that's when you have those bottom line conversations.
Yeah. So you actually go in. That's a great approach. You set the bar, and so anything above it is green grass.
I'm trying to set up happiness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to set it up so they're like, they're gonna?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Wow, they didn't ask me for anything?
I thought we were going to get nothing, but here's what we got. Those types of things. And if you can manage the expectations a little bit, it helps you in negotiating too. And then the deals are so much easier because, like you say, either rock the boat or what's your tail of the bull?
Yeah, never hold on to the tail of the bull.
Tail of the bull. So when your clients are getting super emotional, you have to be the one to bring them back and say, here's what reality is. Give them all the choices. We're transaction brokers. We can't make any decisions. But we can say, here are all of your decisions. Not like, here's the decision. Here's all of your decisions. And then you got to talk through them all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I use that analogy a lot because we do have clients that just, it's the visual. And over the years, I've been able to do this where I just let them do their thing. They go and they vent and they buck around in the pen. I just visual bucking around in a pen. And then I go, okay, are you done? Come back over here and let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And not all clients, but it's an emotional purchase. And back to your point, Shannon, I mean, just try to remove the emotional component out of that.
As much as possible.
Yeah. As much as you can. I mean, you can't, we're not robots, but we certainly can try to set that on the table.
And when you get emotional, just call them later.
Yeah, that's right. Just take a minute to breathe.
Don't call now.
Yeah. The Sunday evening conversations of, we've had many of those over the years where, people get emotional on the other line. Have you ever heard of the term BATNA? Yep. Best alternative to negotiating an agreement. And I think that's one thing that buyers or sellers really need to have on their side and think through. What is my BATNA? What is my best alternative to negotiating an agreement? Now, your BATNA may not be a good thing, my best alternative to not negotiating this contract or closing is that my U-Haul shows up and I'm homeless. That's not a good BATNA. A good BATNA is, hey, I already own a home. I can buy this one without selling it. If I don't end up buying it, it's okay, right? So there's two different sides of the spectrum. I encourage our listeners to understand your best alternative to negotiating an agreement, so you always know where your compass is, whether you need to really lay it all on the line and get a deal done, or if it doesn't come together, you can back away with grace and move on with your life.
I think thinking of that too is just because something is your best alternative doesn't mean it's someone else's. Maybe the seller doesn't have to move. Maybe they just want to. So they're not really going to negotiate versus you want this house so badly, but you only have this much. It might just not work because you guys just aren't quite on the same wavelength. You know, you need it for $15,000, $20,000 less, and they're not going to take a penny less, even though they know it's listed high and they don't care, you know? So I think sometimes you just need to realize that you're not going to have the best outcome because you guys don't have the same priorities, I guess is where.
Yeah. And in retrospect,
okay.
Sometimes those are the best outcomes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm sure glad that didn't work out because I found something that
something better.
It's like relationships. Sometimes they just don't work. Sometimes you bring a buyer and a seller together and the deal's not going to happen. I remember that word, stressors. Not levers, but the stressors. Like if you have to get out of your house, or you're going to be homeless, that's a big stressor.
Yeah.
So if you kind of push on that little stressor, that you can get an advantage in negotiations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you guys all taken negotiation courses?
I have. Yeah.
I haven't. So
There's actual strategies that I think every realtor would benefit from. Closing strategies is another one that would be really good for realtors to go to. So anybody out there, take a class.
Yeah. And I think anytime you can fill in some education there, it's just going to help round out. You're already naturally a wonderful negotiator. All of us in this room are. That's an important part. But the educational component just adds maybe a little cog here or there, a little bit of
it kind of
polishing.
Like polishes the rough edges, but you do fine.
Yeah. Well,
thanks, Paul.
I wouldn't negotiate.
I don't like negotiating.
I'd buy a house from you.
I'd buy a house from you. Yeah.
I feel like our deals we've done together have been like a little bit harder, but smooth all around versus the ones Paul has been. But the last one was great.
Yeah.
The last one was everything just lined up.
Well, so
perfectly.
Perfect example though. It was your personal house. You had stressors because you're trying to buy.
I felt really
another
calm
house.
that whole time though.
But oddly calm. Yeah.
Oddly calm.
Let's not get back.
Until month 3. And then I was like,
okay.
I started twitching.
Yeah.
I was like,
that was
But
But
he was a good buffer because it was my personal house. If he told me that they were getting frustrated or something over that, I mean, it wasn't on my end, you know. Yeah. I probably been like, just take it off then.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to move.
There was your BATNA.
Yeah.
I didn't have to move.
The BATNA part of it too is when you're a negotiator, you've got to figure out if you're beating your head against this one wall and not getting any further in a negotiation, you have to figure out, how do I continue the negotiation without beating my head against this wall? So like, this is a no-go. We've got to take it another direction.
Find a different route.
Yeah. So sometimes you got to go, okay, seller, you're not giving me anything. Buyer, I've got to go back to you and say, can you give me something here? Because if you give a little, they might give a little bit. So I think a lot of times BATNA is not just for the people in the transaction, it's for the negotiators too.
Understood.
One thing I've seen that's funny is, like you said, sometimes I'm like, I wouldn't do it this way, but I've given them all of their options and this is what they want to do. And it's my job to deliver that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I've had another broker be like, I'm not giving that to them. And be like, yes, you are. You don't get the option to just not. You can know what's going to upset them. You can know, but it's still our jobs to deliver it and how we deliver it. Also being like, okay, it's kind of a lot. Prepare yourself, be ready. And then, like you said, maybe they're frustrated, sleep on it. And tomorrow we're going to respond, instead of just responding right away.
Yeah. If I get somebody that says I'm going to go pray on it, I always say, okay, call me in the morning. And if you wake up and it feels right, we'll go for it.
Yeah.
Because if you have somebody that's on the fence, they need time with their thoughts. They need time to do whatever they need to do to get themselves ready to make that decision. Yeah.
And all of that plays into different personalities. You have to be aware of which personalities you're playing with here, because some people are very much analytical with their approaches and other people are very much emotional. And so really a big part of our job, and the very best negotiators are able to frame a perspective based on the recipient. So they seek first to understand what that recipient is, and then they frame a perspective that makes sense to that analytical person or that emotional person. We're winding down on time, but I just want to get your thoughts real quick on love letters. Anybody have any experience with love letters? Aspen, why don't you throw in some thoughts on love letters?
I am not a fan. I have won deals using them. There was one deal actually that I can think of where it was during COVID when people were just putting in offers 30, 40, 50,000 over asking. And this guy was a VA loan and he was putting his best foot forward. I mean, he was going 30, 40,000 over and just was getting beat. We put, I think, 14 offers.
Oh my gosh.
And finally there was one that had just came up and I went to, pull up all the information on it. I do quite a bit of digging before. So I was looking at everything and I noticed that there was no name on the assessor page. It was kind of blank. And I was like, I bet this is a police officer or something similar. It was. So he wrote a love letter, saying, I'm a vet, I'm a single dad, trying to get into the house. And he only wrote 4 asking. She got their offers over asking and she went with his. So I will say sometimes they work and sometimes they're needed, but I'm very hesitant. I always tell my sellers not to accept them because I think you can get into fair housing issues.
Right. So
I get nervous about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what we're talking about specifically for the listeners is someone writing a letter when they submit an offer saying, I'm a single dad and, I love your home. I want to raise my family there. And would you consider me with the offer? Paul, what are your thoughts real quick on love letters?
I don't have a lot of experience with them, but I think if you start a deal emotionally, you can only continue emotionally. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like you can shut that off and now we're going to be very prudent in our negotiating inspection and repairs and stuff like that. So that's why
interesting point.
I don't necessarily like them because I like a clean deal, no emotions. That's how I like to do things.
Okay, great. Fair enough. Shannon, any thoughts on love letters?
Yeah, I like always, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. You can use them at times and it's really useful, but I don't want to have to give one to my customer. I agree. How do you know that someone just lost their husband and she's a widow and this is everything she can afford? And then you get to the home inspection and she wants 80 items. And how do you tell her no?
Yeah. And that's to Paul's point there.
And I agree. The fair housing issue comes in there as well. We don't need to make decisions on whether we buy or sell a house based on the person that's buying or selling it. That should not be the factor. So it's I don't like the way they feel.
I think that's a great point, Shannon. And I'll just wrap up the conversation here just to say, I'm not a fan of love letters either. I really think that the fair housing component kicks in. I mean, then if they write a love letter and they don't get the acceptance, it's, hey, because, maybe because I have too many kids, or maybe it's because of this situation or this ethnicity or whatever else. And that really is not the point of the negotiation. The point of the negotiation is to have a willing, capable, and able buyer purchase from a willing and able seller. So I agree with you. I would say do not do love letters if you can avoid them. So that's our talking points today on some of the negotiation secrets that we use at the Lyons Group. There are next level strategies that we didn't get into today, but we can certainly discuss those with you in person. But they're secret.
We're not going to get into them.
Yeah. Hey, we shared some secrets today, but
if you want the secrets, you can contact us.
That's right. You can schedule a consultation with anyone at the Lyons Group. Go to sjcbroker.com and we're all on there, all of our information. Schedule a consultation with us. We'll talk to you about the next level strategies that really put us in a position that brings success time and time again for our clients. And it's really a proprietary system that we've developed over the years. So it's fantastic. Also follow us on Facebook, like our YouTube channel, throw out a comment if you want to see a specific episode or a talking point. We love engagement from our viewers and we appreciate you watching today. And until next time, we'll see you at the Den.
Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in the Den.